Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to entertain you as I transform this Corsair 5000D Airflow, priced at £155, into the brand new Corsair iCUE 5000T, priced at £350. Ta-da! When I reviewed this Corsair 5000D Airflow almost exactly a year ago, it was priced at £140. These days, with the price of absolutely everything going up, it's £155. Not a huge difference, but slightly more. You can also buy an iCUE RGB version of this case that has RGB fans at the front, and that'll cost you another £30. So instead of this black fan here and a black fan there, you get some RGB fans, but they're fairly basic. Alternatively, you can step up to the 5000X RGB QL version. As the name suggests, Corsair QL fans. That is £270, which strikes me as a serious sum of money, but Corsair charges plenty for their QL fans. They have LEDs on both sides of the fan, so regardless of which side of your radiator it's on, whether you're looking at the case from this side or this, you get LEDs galore. However, the core chassis for those cases is this. It's the extras that change the price quite dramatically. So when Corsair told me they were sending me the iCUE 5000T RGB priced at £350 here in the UK, $400 euros elsewhere in the world, I was filled with a sense of foreboding. What had they done to make this case special and worth such an enormous amount of money? That QL version at £280, that's expensive. Adding another £70 on top? What are they providing for that money? At first glance, the 5000T is quite different to the 5000D, but the core specification is very similar. Let's pull the panels off and then I can show you how the two cases are very similar and also how they differ. Take out these little locking screws on the side panels, which are just for security. Once you've received the case, you won't be needing these screws ever again unless you're intending to ship it somewhere. A swinging glass door, and away. 5000D has a completely different latching mechanism. Tempered glass, nice and solid. Around the back, steel panel. It's got that side radiator position with filter as before, but you will note we do not have a cable management door, which seemed to make no sense at all with the 5000D, having a door over your cables behind a panel. So once that's away, you've got full access. Let's take out that filter there, nice and easy. And now we have the three LL120 fans on show. You don't need to remove this frame for anything whatsoever. We have a radiator rack inside, which if you do want to pull off this panel, for some reason I've done it just to see what happens. There are 4 screws which are slightly awkward to deal with, and then you yank the panel when it comes away, but it doesn't achieve anything. So modders, if you want, you can remove this panel. There's no need. Top panel. There we go. And now you can see the front I/O ports are actually standing proud of the top of the frame. And if we lift it like so, there we have a magnetic filter. And now you can see the radiator AIO stroke fan mounts should you wish. Inside the chassis, at first glance, it looks similar but different to the 5000D and therefore the 5000X and the 5000X QL. But you can see it's taller, you can see we've got more material above the core chassis, and we've got something different going on down below. Turn to the back, and now you can see that this 5000T is pretty much identical to the 5000D, except we have a different Corsair Commander unit. That point of difference, because this chassis is taller, wider and longer than the previous 5000s, is in essence we have RGB added up top and RGB added down below. which makes for quite a pretty light show. You can see the specification of the 5000T has changed very little from the 5000D, so the dimensions are slightly larger. Fan support, Corsair supplies 3 of the LL120s, so it seems unlikely you'll swap them out for 2 140s. In the top you can install 3 120s or 2 140s. The side position by the motherboard tray supports 3 120s, and at the rear you can install a 120mm fan. Radiator support is much the same, so in the front a 280 or 360, in the top a 280 or 360. The side position by the motherboard tray a 360. If you're installing 360mm radiators, you need to choose either the front or the side position. You cannot install 2 360s at the front and side simultaneously. At the rear you can install a 120, but it seems unlikely. Expansion slots 7+2 if you want to go for a vertical GPU mount, but of course you'll need a riser. The motherboard supports up to eATX 277mm wide. It would be fun to see someone install a mini ITX in this chassis. For storage we have 4 2.5-inch hard drive or SSD mounts and 2 3.5-inch hard drive mounts. Power supply is full-size ATX up to 250mm in length. We have 170mm clearance for the CPU cooler, and the GPU can be up to 400mm in length. The front I/O gives you 4 USB 3.0 Type A's and 1 USB 3.1 Type C, along with audio jacks and power and reset buttons. I've covered the 5000D in 3 separate videos now. There was the original review where I packed out the chassis with Corsair HydroX custom loop cooling. Then I revisited the 5000D where I discussed the different ways you could put fans in the case and cut back on the side mounting position, and ended up with fans in the front and the roof. And then I did a third video using Corsair's liquid cooled SSD. So if you want to do more background research into the 5000D and the core chassis within the 5000T, do please check out those videos. Meanwhile, rather than repeat myself, I'm going to get on and build in the 5000T. Here's the hardware I've chosen. Corsair RM1000i Special Edition power supply, because it's white in colour and Corsair branded. Motherboard. MSI Meg Z690 Unify, high-end Intel 12th Gen motherboard. And that supports this Core i9-12900K processor, along with some Corsair Vengeance DDR5 memory rated at 5200 mega transfers, and a Sabrent Rocket 4.0 SSD Gen 4 M.2 NVMe. Graphics card, Palit RTX 3080 10GB, and for the cooling we're going with this Noctua NH-D5 chromax.black. I've done liquid cooling to death in the Corsair 5000D, so we're bringing air cooling to the 5000T. Building the PC, nice and straightforward. As you can see, it's a simple build. One thing that bugged me with the way the 5000T was delivered is that the cables feeding from the 3 LL120 fans at the front around to the Commander XT unit are black in colour, and they trailed across the white panel inside the case for no reason that I could see. So I've rerouted those, and the result is much tidier. It does, however, speak to the feeling that this case is a thing and then extra things are plugged into it. It's not an integrated whole. If you look around the back, it works well. It works better than the original 5000D, but even so, it doesn't feel like it is an integrated system. It is a big thing with various extra things plugged into it. Having said that, initial impressions of the way the RGB strips are showing through the top panel, the front panel and the bottom, I'm liking that. It looks pleasing. We're using a pre-release version of Corsair's iCUE software. It identifies the 5000T as an integrated whole, and then you can see how it breaks down into the various components. And of course you've got RGB control both for the fans and the lighting strips, and then you have cooling control for the fans. One thing that is annoying is that out of the box, the quiet preset for the fans isn't quiet. Let's try something simple like opening 3D Mark. Ambient 16, CPU temp 22, fans are now up to 1500 RPM. 1700. CPU temperature hasn't budged. And now the fans are slowing down 1500 RPM and dropping. So why the heck did iCUE feel the need to tell the fans to spin up just to open Time Spy? And after a bit of playing around, I'm quite sure it's to do with the way the temperature sensor is spiking as the Core i9-12900K bursts into life when it's performing even the smallest of workloads. Okay, we're going to try another experiment. So I'm using a custom fan curve which is set to 45% flat, and then at the very end it climbs and the CPU temperature goes above 90 Celsius. 45% equates to 1000 RPM, which is essentially silent. Open 3D Mark. Now clearly the CPU temperature is way down this, I mean call it a curve, but it's a straight line. So the instruction is to stick at 1000 RPM, which is what it's doing. So the custom fan curve works fine, and that leaves me with something of a dilemma. I am strongly tempted to bounce up and down with rage and fury that the pre-release version of iCUE that's been paired with this monumentally expensive case is effectively not fit for purpose because the quiet fan profile is nothing of the sort. I could do that. Or I could take the view that Corsair will doubtless fix that fan profile in the near future, and by the time you buy this case, if you're in the market for the 5000T, that you'll be completely oblivious to this issue. Or I could even take the somewhat extraordinary view that enthusiasts like to tinker with custom fan curves or plugging fans directly to their motherboard and using the BIOS. Personally, I think that's a rubbish argument, but it does hold a small amount of water. So for the time being, I'm going to hold off on the grumpiness and get on with thermal testing. As always, I used a combination of Cinebench R23 and Time Spy stress tests, so both the CPU and the GPU were simultaneously being stressed. Power draw at the wall socket varied, but 660 watts up to 690 watts. So we're talking a proper workload. If you cast your eyes back to my launch review of the Core i9-12900K, you will recall that on auto settings on a motherboard that is gentle with the processor, it draws about 190 watts, which is a lot of power. This MSI Unify is slightly less subtle about the job. We're talking 219 watts on auto when it's under load. So the Noctua D15, it got a workout. For the first test run, I ran the 3 LL120 fans at 1500 RPM and the 2 Noctua fans on the CPU cooler at 1000 RPM, and it sounded like this. After that, I ramped up the speed of the CPU fans, so the 3 LL120s still at 1500 RPM and the 2 Noctuas at 1500 RPM, and it sounded like this. And as you can see, the difference in temperature for the CPU, fairly minimal, but a couple of degrees is better than nothing. My next move was to add 3 more LL120 fans after I've got the Noctua cooler on the CPU. If I was using an AIO, we'd have 2 or 3 more fans added. And it struck me that the back of the case certainly looks rather empty. The top also to a certain extent, but the back, it was crying out for some cooling. So I reached to the shelf and installed these 3 LL120s. Now these are black fans rather than white fans, but that's just a colour difference. And then it occurred to me, I was running the 3 LL120s at the front of the case at 1500 RPM. However, they were not running at 100%. They were running at 65%. And yet, the reviewer's guide for this 5000T definitely says those fans run at 1500 RPM. So I did some digging in, and I discovered that Corsair LL120 fans in black and in white are two different fans. The LL120s run 50% faster when they're white, 2200 RPM. Now we're talking plus minus 10%. And that's 200 RPM in its own right. They also have a lower floor speed. Looks like it's 360 RPM, which I didn't understand in the slightest. I asked Corsair about this, and I was told that the white versions of the fans were originally intended for a Platinum Special Edition all-in-one cooler, and they felt those fans needed some more grunt, so they came up with some faster versions. Here's the thing, the reviewer's guide for the 5000T refers to the fan speed of 1500 RPM for LL120, and yet the white case comes with white fans which are 2200 RPM. The black case, which I don't have here, I am assured comes with these fans which are 1500 RPM, so we're talking two distinctly different fans. Furthermore, if you look at Corsair's website, you will see from this image that their artwork conflicts with the specification of the fan. Corsair tells me they're changing this, but it suggests to me there's a certain amount of confusion going on. Having established that there are two types of Corsair LL120 fan, and having installed 3 extra fans, I ran all 6 fans at 1500 RPM, so you'll appreciate 3 of them are running flat out, 3 of them are running at 2/3 speed. I left the 2 Noctua fans running on the CPU cooler at 1500 RPM, so all the fans 1500 RPM, and it sounded like this. And as you can see, it made barely a scrap of difference to the temperatures. Finally, I reverted to the original 3 Noctua LL120s at the front of the case and ramped them up to maximum speed, which was 2250 RPM, and I left the 2 Noctua fans running at 1500 RPM, and it sounded like this. And as you can see, it had very little impact on cooling. So what are my conclusions about the Corsair iCUE 5000T RGB? Well, on the pros side of things, number one, the RGB. I like the way it looks, the RGB from the fans in the front and any other fans you install, but more to the point, the RGB strips in the roof, the front and the floor of the case, I think work very well. It's clear that Corsair's actually put some thought into packaging their accessory RGB strips, so thumbs up there. The cable management system works well. Around the back of the case there's a lot of stuff going on, and yet it's okay. It's neat and tidy, everything's secure, and you'd have no difficulty adding storage drives and finding space for the cables. There's plenty of space above the motherboard for installing hardware, i.e. in the roof of the case. So many times we struggle for those few millimeters of vital space. 5000 family, they work well in that respect, and you have loads of options for cooling, whether you go air-cooled, AIO, custom loop. You can put the cooler in the front, the side or the roof, although personally I'd ignore the side position. There's plenty of space and you can pretty much build it any way you fancy. Cons. There's nothing special about this case to justify the very steep price. It's a regular case with a load of add-ons, so we have a Corsair control unit around the back, RGB fans in the front, RGB strips distributed liberally around the case. It looks good, but at its heart, it's a very regular case. Some of the steel panels feel flimsy. I said this about the 5000D. This is the same core chassis. Under this impressive top cover, the inner steel is actually quite flexy. That's one thing when you're paying £150 for a case, not great. This case is enormously expensive, and yet of course the fundamental hardware hasn't changed. It seems to me the 5000T should come with a rear fan. It looks peculiar without one. Depending on where you add a liquid cooler, or if you add a liquid cooler, you may well add extra fans in the roof. But that rear position, Corsair should have sorted that out of the factory. You don't get a user guide. We're told that from now on Corsair is going to give you a QR code so you can download a guide. Well, okay, the environment and eco and such like, and this way you can look at it on a nice HD screen. But even so, it would be good to have a guide with. After all, it's a sheet of paper, or a couple of sheets of paper, and we don't have the QR code, we don't have the guide, we have a promise, so that's annoying. And finally, small point, those black fan cables from the front fans trailed across the white panel and looked messy. It wasn't difficult to fix, but it just goes to show that someone at Corsair didn't give that enough thought. Would I buy this case myself? No, absolutely not. Would I use this case for a build? Possibly. Not sure, we'll have to see. Would I recommend it? Tricky. To the enthusiast, I'm going to say no. However, I am utterly certain that Corsair has produced this case at this price because they know there is a market out there. We've seen that QL edition, which is very highly priced. It's clearly selling, so this is a step on from that point. Remember, keyboards never used to be £100 and £150 and £200. That was crazy talk. And yet, look at the state of the market today. So this case at £350, I am convinced it will sell. It might not sell to you, and it certainly won't sell to me. Nonetheless, that means it has to be worth considering.